There is a photograph taken by a reconnaissance drone sometime in the autumn of 2010. It shows the jagged spine of a ridge in Kunar Province, Afghanistan, a place where the Hindu Kush doesn't so much rise from the earth as tear through it. The peaks in that photograph are the color of old bone. The valleys between them are the color of nothing at all. In the center of that image, almost too small to notice, sits a cluster of sandbags, corrugated steel, and wire. A smudge of artificial light against a landscape that has swallowed armies whole. Persians, Macedonians, Soviets, and asked no forgiveness for any of them. That smudge of light was Outpost Zero. The men stationed there had a word for the nights. They didn't call them quiet. They called them waiting. And they had a name for the thing that waited with them. A name spoken only in daylight, only in short sentences, only when the generator was running loud enough to drown out the sound it made beneath the words. They called them the Night Screamers. Weeks after the incident, a search team would find that cigarette ember, long dead, stone cold, surrounded by a perfect ring of spent shell casings. Every single one pointed outward, away from the center, away from the light. None of the men who fired them were ever found. Outpost Zero sat on the highest point of a ridge overlooking a valley the military needed to watch. Men had been placed there the way a stone is placed in a wall, not because it wanted to be there, but because the structure required it. The approach road, such as it was, wound down 6 kilometers of switchbacks before connecting to anything resembling civilization. In winter, it frequently became impassable. Resupply was erratic. Communication with the fire base below was conducted through a field radio that had developed the habit of producing long stretches of white static for no reason that the radio operator could diagnose. What the men of Outpost Zero learned very quickly was that the valley below did not echo. In most mountain terrain, a sound will bounce, a rifle shot, a rockfall, a voice. It will return to you, diminished and ghostly, but present. In the valley beneath the ridge, sounds went down and did not come back. The men learned not to shout toward it. They learned this the same way soldiers learn most things, through an experience that could not be cleanly explained in a written report. The garrison in the autumn of 2010 numbered 11 men. A sergeant named Calloway held the post. Quiet, competent, with the stillness of someone who had learned to conserve everything. His second was a specialist named Herc, a large man from somewhere flat in the American Midwest who wore the outpost's cold like a personal insult. The others filled roles: radio, medical, overwatch, logistics. They had been on the ridge for 43 days. On the 44th night, the fuel gauge on the diesel generator read just below 1/4. Every night at the outpost followed the same liturgy. An hour before sunset, Herc would walk the perimeter. Not for tactical reasons. The ridge approach had tripwires and the valley below was watched by motion sensors. He walked the perimeter because the perimeter lights needed to be checked. Each fixture, each cable junction, each bulb housing, inspected with the particular attention of a man who has learned that darkness here is not merely inconvenient. The smell of diesel hung over everything, thick, chemical, somehow comforting. The generator occupied a reinforced enclosure near the center of the post. It was a heavy aging machine that produced a low, rhythmic throb, a sound felt as much as heard, a vibration that moved through the soles of boots and up through the legs and settled somewhere behind the sternum. When it ran, the men breathed without thinking about it. It was the heartbeat of the outpost. It had been the heartbeat of this position, in various incarnations, for years. The men ate while there was still natural light in the sky. Not because they were required to, because by some unspoken consensus, the hours after dark were reserved for other things. Rifles were cleaned methodically. The small, precise sound of metal on metal, the smell of solvent and carbon, a ritual that occupied the hands and quieted the kind of thinking that needed quieting. Flashlights were checked and rechecked, spare batteries arranged by size in a row beside every sleeping position. No one issued this as an order. No one needed to. By the time the sun dropped behind the western ridge and the shadow of the mountain began its slow, inevitable crawl across the outpost floor, every man was doing the same thing. They were not watching the valley. They were not watching the wire. They were watching the line, the precise advancing edge where the natural light ended and the territory of the generator began. The men of Outpost Zero had stopped being afraid of ambush in the valley somewhere around day 15. By day 30, they were afraid of something they could not file a report about, could not call for fire support against, could not address through any of the institutional languages of soldiering. They were afraid of the dark that listened. The sound came first at 2200 hours. Calloway would later describe it in the notes he kept, found in a cargo pocket of the single jacket left behind, as something between a frequency and a pressure. Not a scream in any register he could place, not an animal sound, though the instincts the sound triggered were the deep animal variety. It arrived at a pitch that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and communicate directly with the back teeth, a vibration that moved through enamel and jawbone and produced an immediate, involuntary tightening of every muscle in the body. It lasted 4 seconds, then nothing. The perimeter light on the northeast corner went out. There was no pop, no flicker, no gradual dimming. One moment it was burning clean and white. The next, it was not. The darkness moved into that corner the way water fills a vessel, completely, immediately, as though it had been waiting for precisely this volume to become available. 3 of the men on watch trained their flashlight beams on the wire at the northeast corner. The beams were good equipment, powerful, focused. They illuminated the wire clearly for approximately 4 meters. Beyond that point, the beams did not scatter or fade in the normal way of light meeting open air and distance. They stopped, not the way light stops when it hits a surface, the way light stops when something is taking it. The darkness in that corner had a quality that made the eyes refuse to settle on it. Something moved in it, not a silhouette, a subtraction. A region within the darkness that was darker still, that displaced the existing black the way a shark displaces water, smoothly, without turbulence, without sound. The high-pitched vibration came again, closer. The generator coughed at 01:43 hours. One cough, a brief surge, the lights flaring brilliantly, throwing hard white shadows in every direction, and then silence, and then absolute dark. 3 seconds. In the first second, no one moved. The darkness was so complete that the eyes, receiving nothing, began generating their own images, movement at the edges, shapes that weren't there. In the second second, someone kicked the emergency flare cluster near the radio enclosure. The mechanism was manual, designed for exactly this scenario. A boot connected with it. The flares did not immediately ignite. In the third second, the air near the east wall changed. Not temperature, not pressure. Something more elemental. The sense that the geometry of the space was rearranging, that the dimensions of the outpost had silently expanded to accommodate something that had not been inside them a moment before. The flares caught. Magnesium white erupted across the outpost. Harsh, shadow carving, merciless light that turned everything it touched into high-contrast geometry. Sandbags, weapons, faces, wire. The men's eyes, dilated to maximum in the darkness, slammed shut involuntarily against the onslaught. When they opened, Perkins was gone. His rifle was on the ground. His radio handset dangled from its coiled cord, swinging gently. In the circle of a flashlight beam someone had dropped, pointing upward at the corrugated ceiling. His right boot was visible. Just the boot. The laces were still tied. In the residual glare of the flares, against the outer wall where the light cast deep shadows before meeting the dark beyond the perimeter wire, they could be seen, briefly, partially, only because they passed between a light source and the eye. Elongated, wrong in every proportion. Limbs that tapered to points that might have been extremities or might have been weapons. They moved with the patience of something that does not operate in the dimension of hurry. And then they were gone. The impression remained. What followed was not a battle in any tactical sense. It was a fight to keep the world lit. Calloway moved with focused velocity, pulling every flare from every vest, every pack, distributing them with hard, precise gestures, pointing to positions in a circle. Flares went out along the perimeter in quick succession, white light erupting in arcs, the chemical smell of burning magnesium acrid and eye-watering, beautiful. Wherever the magnesium burned, the darkness contracted, not retreated. Contracted the way a muscle does, pulling back, compressing, coiling. The lighter wouldn't spark. One of the younger men, a specialist whose name appears only as an initial in Calloway's notes, had been issued a backup lantern and couldn't get the igniter to catch. His thumb worked the flint wheel again and again. The sound of it, that frantic, dry, rhythmic click, 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 was somehow worse than the vibration scream. It was the sound of human technology at the edge of its competence, trying desperately to produce the one thing evolution had granted the species as a defense against the dark. Click, click, click. It caught. The lantern bloomed to life, and he moved it outward like an offering. At the south wall, something cold closed around an ankle. Not like a hand, like an idea of a hand, without heat, without friction. Reyes, the medic, did not go. He went down to one knee, and another pair of hands found his arms, and 3 flashlights converged on the space at the south wall simultaneously, and whatever had been there was no longer there, and the cold released, and Reyes was hauled back into the circle of the lantern light by hands that shook violently and did not stop shaking. Every flare that burned gave them 60 seconds. They burned flares for 4 hours. The sun came up at 06:21 hours. It came up the way it always does in the mountains, first as a gray reluctance at the eastern edge of the sky, then as a hard orange line above the peaks, then as full and indifferent light flooding everything, bleaching the shadows to nothing, making the valley below look almost habitable. The outpost was quiet. The rescue team from the firebase arrived at 11:40 hours, having received no radio contact for 11 hours. What they found, and what their report describes with the particular careful language of men trying to document something for which the documentation categories do not exist, was clean. Not empty. Clean. No blood. No bodies. Weapons still present. Personal equipment still present in most positions. The generator was out of fuel. The perimeter lights were dark. The interior of the outpost smelled of ozone. The specific electrical smell of a place where some form of energy has been expended in significant quantities, and of burned matches. Thousands of them. Every match from every book, every box, every emergency kit had been burned to the nub and carefully placed in a pile near the center of the outpost, as though their ash could be saved. 7 men were unaccounted for. The rescue team's report uses the word unaccounted, not missing, not dead. Unaccounted, which is a word that preserves the possibility that there is an account, somewhere, that simply hasn't been found yet. The cigarette was found near the north wall, cold for weeks, surrounded by its ring of spent casings, all pointed outward, at nothing. The valley below held no tracks, no disturbance, no evidence of anything passing through it in either direction. The mountains simply continued being mountains, ancient, indifferent, keeping whatever they kept.